All right, hello. Um, I've got no idea what I'm calling this video, and to be quite honest, it's going to be all over the place. I'm going to start off by looking at. We're going to look back at Christmas, why Christmas is, or at least why I think Christmas is put where it's put in the calendar. Um, and we're going to look at some of the symbolism with the idea of disc shapes, sun and moons overlapping one another. I'm not really going to be talking about the eclipse, so to speak, but really I'm looking at the idea of a balancing um, kind of symbolism with the Vesica Pisces of these two heavenly bodies that we can see above us in the sky. Okay, the two things that everybody can make out in the sky pretty easily: the sun and the moon. Okay, so what I've got going on here, it looks pretty complicated, but it actually isn't quite as complicated as it probably looks. It probably just looks a mess right now, but we're going to go through each individual bit of this, and what that will allow me to do is explain my thoughts on, the placement of Christmas, what that's really all about, and we'll look at some other numbers that tie into that, and we're going to also look at, no doubt, this 2/11 date, the 11th of February, which I've kind of got penciled in right now for something with the Hoover Dam. And then I've got another date that I was looking at, again, Madonna. There's always something with Madonna. Every time I do a video on Madonna, I got another date the next day, to look at. But the 16th of January was kind of my next date that I was looking at. And I'll explain why a little bit more in here. It actually was a date that I was looking at before I sort of compiled all this stuff, and I will backtrack after I've done this video, and I will do another video on why I was starting to look at that date. Okay, but that was the 16th of January. So anyway, without further ado, let's just get cracking on the sun moon balance thing that is Christmas. Okay, so the first thing is the sun, of course, is Jesus, and the moon is Mary. Okay, I think everybody's kind of up with that idea. And so what we've got going on, the big question is, why doesn't the calendar, why don't we start the year over at Christmas? And more to the point is, why isn't it's just kind of odd that the solstice isn't on Christmas Day as well. We don't have the solstice, Christmas Day, and the end and the start of the year all on the same day. There's some confudgery going on there where stuff is split apart. And what that does is it encodes a whole bunch of ideas and a whole bunch of numbers. So again, to keep things simple, I'm doing away with a lot of the point this and the point that on these numbers. I'm trying to keep whole numbers because that's what we see. Like for example, here you'll see I've got the sun, 365 days here for the sun, the cycle of the sun, 365 days. I've done away with the quarter because we don't really see a quarter of a day. What we see is that the sun has drifted off its point by a quarter of a day, if you follow what I'm saying. We don't have, the sun doesn't come up and just do a quarter day. It doesn't come up at 6 o'clock in the morning and then is left by midday. What we see is the actual sun drifting off from its reference point in the sky, or wherever you're observing it from, by a quarter day. Okay, and so we observe that drift, and then it comes back in. We add a day back in, and then it's back into where it was to begin with. Okay, so we have a whole bunch more numbers that are encoded there by having these little bits of drift here and there, and it's the same with the moon as well. There's sort of drift here and there with it because, of course, we're into decimal places. But my theory is on why not to go the whole hog and put all the decimal places in and get everything, you know, down to the, down to the wire in terms of like getting it so accurate. I don't think we need to be that accurate. I think there are layers of accuracy, and I think there's layers of depth to reality. And yes, you can go that deep, and it's interesting to go that deep. But what I think, my theory behind it is, what we're going to see is just a sort of a repeat of what the surface level is. It's a bit like one of those, fractal patterns where as you zoom in, it's basically just the same pattern over and over again. Okay, so that's my logic for not really, number one, to keep it simple, and number two, because I don't know if we necessarily need to go that deep. We're just keeping it simple, basically, which is interesting. For me, that's one of my favorite little sayings. Keep it simple, stupid, is because the simple ideas are the best ideas sometimes. Anyway, let's get rid of that line. Enough waffling. So what I've got here is I've done some. These are really not really supposed to actually represent the actual. See this circle here with the sun? That's not really supposed to be the sun that we're seeing in the sky, even though it's kind of doing dual purpose here. Really what I'm trying to show is the actual cycle, the actual path of the sun that the sun makes, okay? Or I'm trying to represent that here. And that's 360 days, okay? And then if you go to a lunar calendar, more often than not, they're 354 days. And the caveat here again is that because we're dealing in decimal places, fractions of whole numbers as well, is that 355 days is also another length for a lunar calendar, and you get variance between basically these two things here. I've got the days difference between the sun and the moon. So between those two calendars, if you just had a pure sun calendar and if you had a pure moon calendar, the difference between those two things, for the most part, we're sticking around 11, but we can vary back to 10 as well, days difference. Okay, but that's important to know because, again, with the dollar bill, the 1011 references, I mean, it's just mental with the 1011. I've got a couple other videos to do on 1011 and some famous people that surround that number. But anyway, 1011 encoded in the dollar bill, and again, it's the difference between these two things in terms of day length in the cycle. As you can see, 354 is 11 days short of 365. Okay, so with that being said, what do we have going on at Christmas? Well, my thoughts on Christmas are we have the sun and the moon crossing, or crossing, however you want to do a cross. But those two things are crossing or kissing. So Christ and cross and kiss and Chris, they're all the same, derived from the same idea of the word, and that's two things coming together, touching, or or going across, two things intersecting. Okay, so there's a point of contact between two things basically, and so right here we've got like these, the sun and the moon are kissing there, and what I want to say is I've got this other diagram over here with, you can see the Vesica Pisces in this one. Actually, you can see two Vesica Pisces in this other one, but this is the sort of, you probably would have come across something looking like this before. But again, this is basically it's basically the same idea, and it's encoding the same numbers. With the only difference is, because these two things are crossing here, my middle circle here, you know, this sort of makes this eye shape, but the middle circle, this green middle circle, we've just got a different size here. And I kind of liked, the reason why I kind of kept this idea here rather than trying to explain it all with this one, as we'll go through it, you'll understand what I'm saying, but is because this green line here, this green circle, is basically representing the Earth, I believe. Okay, and what this is also or if you like, it's representing the balance between the sun and the moon. You know, it's the place where we live. Yeah, it's our observation deck of the sun and the moon. Yeah, so this is important because this is the in-between place between the sun and the moon. This is where we observe our reality. Not to delve off too far here, but the problem with the heliocentric model, this is out of left field now, but the problem with the heliocentric model is we're ignoring the hidden balance, the hidden spiritual balance with the moon and the other hidden bodies that exist within the Ptolemaic type geocentric model, which is where you have little epicycles, and what those epicycles look like is there's a solid planet and it seems to be rotating around a point, and opposite that point, if you were to imagine a fictional moon, you know, another fictional body there that doesn't really, you can't really see it though because it's a metaphysical thing, that planet that we can see is rotating around a point, and the opposite side of that is a metaphysical version of that planet. Makes a lot more sense to me. But you see, when you put the sun on a pedestal, when you make the sun the center of the universe, and you know, we're not looking from the Earth anymore, and we're not taking into account the moon realistically as a balancing thing, what's happened to the sun? It's gotten further away from us. We've put it on a pedestal, it's grown. It's become gigantic in comparison to, you know, the rest of the planets, which, you know, are mere specks of dust in comparison, really, you know. So the issue we have with the sun placing on the pedestal is that we've moved away from a balanced, you know, a balanced system. Now we've put the sun at the center of the universe, as so to speak, and what we're observing now is basically, you know, an egg-shaped orbit. You know, I mean, I guess you could say it's a bit like a Vesica Pisces, and shouldn't that be balanced, Dan? Shouldn't, you know, isn't that a balanced thing? The problem is you're not balancing. That Vesica Pisces isn't balancing with anything else anymore. You know, there is no balance. It's its own thing. So rather than being a Vesica Pisces, it's a bloody egg. We've returned back to the womb. You know, it's an egg-shaped orbit that we have now because we're putting the sun at the center of the universe. And yeah, the egg-shaped orbit, yeah, it just looks like an egg, doesn't it? What's at the center of an egg? The egg yolk, the sun. Contained. We've gone back into the womb. We're being contained again. So I just think that's interesting with this idea of, you know, and when you look at the Ptolemaic, you know, those patterns, those Etch-a-Sketch patterns, and you end up with that kind of, oh, I can't draw it here, but you know, you kind of end up with these sort of circles that kind of, this is not going to do anything any justice here, but you end up with these circles that end up making this sort of, you know, a more beautiful rose sort of lotus flower patterns, you know. That to me speaks of divinity and perfectness rather than and I'm not to take anything away from the egg, but you know, that's basically what I feel like has happened there. We've gone back into the womb, when we place the sun at the center of thing. So this makes more sense to me, this idea of this thing being balanced. Anyway, we got the sun and the moon. We've got 365 days. We've got 354 days for those two cycles. We're going to try and balance those two things, okay? Which means that we need to take an average. So the easiest way to take the average for these two things is just to add them together and then divide by 2. And so what you'll see here, I've got this average written down, okay? There's the average, 359.5 or 360. That just depends on whether we're going to look at the 354 day, which relates to this, or the 355 day, which relates to 360. Now, just, we're going to be talking about the numbers 355 quite a bit in here, because without getting too far ahead of myself, the ratio for a Vesica Pisces happens to contain the number 153. Okay, and we're going to be talking about the number 153 later on here in a second. But again, the Vesica Pisces, again, if you go to the Bible, I think it's John 21 or something like that, somewhere in there, they're talking about the 153 fish. Yeah, the Vesica Pisces is the fish. Put the little eye on there. Put the little tail on. The Jesus fish here. The 153 fish. You can go and look. There's tons of videos on the 153 fish, and be my guest and go and look that thing up, because there are so many nice gematria connections. There's references within the Bible to do with certain verses and such so forth, and there's also a lot of sort of, I don't know, connections to other patterns to do with, because this is the Trinity basically. So there's other connections to the Holy Trinity as well, in terms of like triangular numbers. 153 shows up in there. 153 connects to 666. In fact, if I remember, I'll do a number jump. I'll show you what the 666. In fact, if I could just tell you off the top of my head, it might be wrong, but you probably could figure it out. It is, if we go from the day of the year that's encoded in the dollar bill, which is 11/11, which is the 315th day of the year. So this is becoming more interesting when we're talking about this stuff with the number 11 again, and then that linking back with the dollar bill and linking back to the 351st day of the year. No, the 315th day of the year, sorry. And let me go around some of this stuff, otherwise we'll get losing track of what I'm doing. So this day, linking back to the 315th day of the year, if we add, so this is what's interesting about it, so the 315th day of the year, if we add on now 351 days to that date, that will take us around to the 28th of October, which was Matthew Perry's death date. And if we just add those two sets of numbers up, there's our 666. Okay, this is the relationship here. This is part of that relationship with 666. And again, the number 36 is also with triangular numbers, I believe. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think the 36 triangular number is 666, maybe. I can't remember. But anyway, yeah, I don't really do much on triangular numbers. I probably should. People have given me that hint before. I think Decoder Ring said, hey, you should look at triangular numbers before, but I've never really had a look at them until, not very often. Put it that way. Anyway, that's just one of those interesting things. I think 153 is the 17th triangular number. So again, this is interesting because the 17 is this number here, okay, and this number here, this 177, is half of this number here. And I'm going to explain why I'm doing half here, because what we've got going on with this 177, so this is all over the place, I apologize, but when we're getting this number here, 177 plus 182 is coming from, is this distance here, basically, from the center of one to the edge of the other, and from the edge of the other to the center of the other one. Okay, so these two added up. So this is half of the sun of the 365, and 177 is half of the moon. Okay, and again with Diana's birthday and the new one, Camilla, is that her name? Camilla Parker Bowles, or whatever her name is. That's her birthday as well. So this is, you know, again with the mother symbolism, the matrix symbolism, and again, I don't like to say matrix too much with Mary, because there's a difference between the corrupted version, and I mean it's the same for the physical side of the world as well. There's the Antichrist, and you know, there's, or the devil, or whatever you want to call the opposite of Jesus, man even. I don't know if there's, it would be interesting to figure out exactly how many righteous men there are in the world, or on earth. Ugh. Not very many. Anyway, so what was I saying? So this 177, again 153, the 17th triangular number, and what more did I want to say about this? Yeah, so what we're doing is, I know this looks like I'm trying to figure out a radius here. I don't want people to get confused. I'm not really figuring out the radius here, because I'm not really, this is not, even though this looks like the moon we'd see in the sky, or the sun we'd see in the sky, like it was the disk itself, I'm really looking at what I'm looking at is the cycle. And really what I'm looking at is the cycle from the center point here around this way, okay, to the center here, because we want to line it up with the center of the cycle. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but we're just looking at half the cycle here, and we're looking at half the cycle here, you know, because this all lines up with the, you know, with the edge of this. And so these two halves are basically being observed together and averaging, forming the Earth and making that average there. It's a little bit easier to understand actually where I've got it drawn over here with this version of the Vesica Pisces thing going on, is that what we've got is, if we could look at this thing, so look at this thing sideways, right? If we look at this thing sideways, I kind of started making them sideways here, these two cycles, okay? So you make the two cycles, sort of turn them flat, and this is what you end up with down the bottom here, okay? So if you're looking at them halfway, you know, flat, and you're wanting to go and get this part here, well, you're going out this way and then back again, and that's the part that you want. And it's the same with the sun. You're going that way and then back again. So they're actually lining up on this line here and lining up here, which is, I know this doesn't make much sense, but this is where this green Earth cycle is here, the green. So it's the same idea over here, but I just thought it was nice to keep these roughly the same size, because we're dealing with roughly the same sized cycles here, okay, with the 365, 354, and 360, or 359. Okay, but that's kind of another way of looking at it and trying to imagine what's going on. Is we're seeing the balance point between here and here, between the two legs, the balance point is, you know, this part of the cycle and this part of the cycle, you know, half of each cycle coming together and being observed, and that's that green circle in the middle there. I don't know if that makes sense or not. It's kind of one of those things you kind of have to think about for a little while. It's not particularly easy to explain, I don't think. It's kind of one of those things you just have to kind of think about, and why I'm doing something a certain way, because I know that looks like I'm trying to find a radius there, and that is not what we're doing. So anyway, so there's our average. So if we could get to the point, Dan, the 359th day of the year just happens to be, I know people have probably been shouting this all the way through as I'm whiffly waffling on, but the 359th day of the year, as we can see, is December the 25th. So Christmas is the 359th day of the year. It's those two cycles amalgamated. It's the balance point between the two cycles, between the moon and the sun, between Mary and Jesus. Okay? So it's not the death of the sun, which is the 21st or the 22nd is usually the solstice. Yeah? The death and the rebirth of the sun, should I say. Okay? And so that's why we're not having Christmas on the 365th day of the year, because we're balancing two different things, two different objects, two different ideas. We're balancing the physical world and the metaphysical world. Okay? The sun, the physical, and the moon, the metaphysical. And so this is why the clever clogs behind formulating the calendar has decided that we should do Christmas on 359. Okay, I don't know what else to say about it. Now, why? As for why the solstice, why we don't bring Christmas in alignment with the solstice as well, I don't know if it has. I can't really find this out. Either I'm not looking in the right places, or I'm not, you know, and I just can't be bothered to spend any more time on it. The only thing I can come up with off the top of my head is, of course, the 3 days that the sun appears to be stationary at Christmas. Okay, oh, well, sorry, not Christmas, the solstice. Okay, and so those 3 days, I'm not sure if they come evenly across that point, whether one day is before the solstice, one day is the solstice, and then the following day after the solstice, whether those 3 days are spread out like that, or whether they come, my thoughts are, is maybe they come after the solstice, because if you just look outside the window and when you observe the days getting longer again, it doesn't get equally, can't remember which way around it is now, but it doesn't get equal the same, you know, the morning doesn't get lighter earlier relative the same as the evenings get light, if you follow what I'm saying. It's almost like one side of the day gets longer first rather than the other. I don't know if that makes sense or not. At least, you know, in relationship to our, you know, the way we've got the clock running, you know. So for argument's sake, I know this probably isn't right, because I should have really thought about this a little bit more before I'm saying it, but just as an example, you know, imagine that in the spring the evening gets lighter quicker than the mornings get lighter. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, let's say it's getting light, let's say it gets light at 7, right? And you go over a period of several weeks and it's getting dark at 5 o'clock in the evening, and you go over a period of weeks and all of a sudden now it's staying lighter longer, so it's, let's say it stays light till 6 at night, but then the morning is only moved to, let's say, instead of 7, it's at like 6:30. It hasn't gone an hour in the other direction. That's a long convoluted way of me trying to explain that maybe those 3 days happen one, like from the 20. So if we called the solstice the 22nd, then the 23rd, the 24th, and then rebirth on the 25th. It's stationary for 3 days there, and then it starts moving again on the 25th. So maybe that's why, maybe it's not. I have no idea. One other thing to think about though with the solstice and the 355 is, again, that 355 encoding right here. What that encodes, this 355 is pretty important, because again, when you go back to this thing and we look at what 355 encodes, 355 days encodes this number 10, and the number 10 encodes 360 days, a perfect cycle. So the solstice falling on that beginning and ending day, again, that might be why that happens. It might not be anything to do with the 3 days of darkness, and I have no idea, to be quite honest, but that's another reason why that might be happening. Is 355 is super duper important. Okay, what more do I want to say? So there's some other numbers up here, and what I've done here is I've treated, because this is 365 days all the way around this cycle, right? I can just divide, I can say each one of these days is like a degree, if you like. It's a measurement of, a degree of that cycle. And so I can divide 365 by pi, and it will give me a relative diameter to this number here. So what's interesting about that, so I've got my sun diameters here, which is 116.183 for just 365, and if you put the quarter day in as well, 365 and a quarter, it's 116.262. But this 116 is super duper important because, of course, of flipping it and looking at the upside, the other half of the cycle. So remember, we want this balanced side of the cycle, and so this, when you're in the unbalanced side, you flipped. I know you're on the unbalanced side of the cycle. So this idea of flipping 116 to 911 is kind of interesting. I don't know, just again thinking kind of out loud here, but we can do the same for the moon, and we can get some diameters for the moon. Notice the moon 112, and notice the number. Now obviously there's more numbers after these. I was doing 3 decimal places just because I didn't want it to get bogged down with too many decimal places, and obviously we're doing the Holy Trinity, so 3 seemed like a good place to finish. And lo and behold, 3 decimal places after the 112 here for the moon with the 354 day cycle is 681, Madonna numbers. Okay, her birthday numbers jumbled up, and so that was kind of interesting, because again, as I was going to say, this 116, I have a date for Madonna for the 116, so these two things linking now is it's kind of interesting. And obviously Madonna, the moon, Mary, it's all the same, it's just interesting the way these numbers are turning out, isn't it? And if you do it for 355 day cycle, it's 113. And what is interesting about the 113 here is, check out the zeros. I actually did more decimal places here just because it was so interesting that this is almost, well, I could call it a perfect 113, but it is pretty interesting, to say the least, that there's an awful lot of zeros there before you start hitting other numbers. So that was interesting, if I could say interesting any more times. And so every once in a while you're going to get a 12-day difference because of the sun going to 366 days. And if the sun goes to 366 days and you have that leap year, which is what LY stands for, leap year, this is 116.51. You've seen a lot of 5-1 references, and obviously 105 days from 9/11 okay, is Christmas. So again, that is really, it's just interesting stuff. I don't know what else to say about it, but it's bloody interesting. Yeah, that's our 12-day difference. So, oh dear, in the two cycles. What else did I want to show you? So what else is really interesting is if you do it for Earth or this, you know, again, this might be Christmas here, 359.5, 360. I've got them here. 114.432, 114, and check out the 114.591. That's kind of interesting as well for the 360, for the perfect, you know, for the perfect cycle, because that's a cycle we use. It's easily divisible, isn't it? And also connects back to this number and back to the solstice. So, you know, excuse me. Anyway, a couple more little things that I wanted to speak about. I've got a couple other numbers down here. So this 153 with the 153 fish, you know, kind of talked about the triangular numbers. I'm not going into those. There's a whole bunch of other interesting stuff with 153. There's some stuff with some other kind of number jump stuff that 153 does as well. I'm not going to get into that. But what I'll say is this number here, this 265 over 153 divided by 153 is the ratio for a Vesica Pisces that is formed when you move, you know, one circle to the center of the other circle and vice versa. So two circles the same size, and they both come to this sort of midpoint. The edge of the circle comes to the midpoint, and what you end up with is this measurement here, or this, it forms a ratio, but 265 runs this way, and then 153 runs this way. Okay, so those are those numbers, which happens to be the square root of 3, which is, I've got it written down here, is 1.73205, yada yada yada. But it's interesting, this 1.73. Now, if you remember the chart of Lorraine, this number shows up twice in the chart of Lorraine. Okay, and it forms an L shape in the chart of Lorraine. And what that L shape goes to, in fact, we have that 713. We have a 713 up here, and we have a 713 over here. If I could write the right way, I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't really matter which way around it is. Anyway, where it comes to is that L shape forms down to this, down to the number 53. The center of the table is a number 11. Okay, or the center of what I call, actually I need to change colors here, but what I call the Great Scott. So you have to have a little bit of watching some of my background videos on this, but there is a cross in the chart of Lorraine that I sometimes talk about. I call it the Great Scott because it's like the cross of St. Andrew. And you know, this is the number over here, and up on this side here, this 1 33 is again another reference back to Christmas, basically, that 133, which runs on this side. And then you have these 713s over in the corners as well, and at the center of this thing is basically an 1118, okay, which can be reduced to a 911 as well. So just again, interesting stuff with the relationship between 713, 53, 153. This is all numbers to do with coming back into balance with God, okay, or coming back into balance. So they're all balancing numbers. And in fact, while we're on the topic of Christmas, Jesus dying at 33, I've talked about this years ago now. It's one of my favorite references for the idea of the number 33, because it's the balance between the sun and moon cycle again. Because that 11 days, like if we imagine this is the start of where the sun, the sun cycle here, and the moon is starting at the same point, every year that goes by, we're going to lose, the moon's going to drift off 11 days. Each one of these little lines I'm putting on here is an 11-day drift every year. 11 days every year. So if you just divide 365 by 11, that'll tell you how many years, because each one of these represents a year, how many years it'll take to get back down to, back round to this point. You got to add all these all the way around until you get back to here. You add all those 11 days up, and where you end up with is the time it takes is 33 years. I think it's like 33.18 recurring, I think, 181818. So again, with the 18 and the 33, I mean, just nuts. But that's, again, that's the 33 of the death of Christ, and of course he's resurrected at 33 as well. He resurrected 3 days inclusive later, isn't he? Okay. So, what else did I want to say? One other interesting thing for English people. So this is pretty interesting, that we're having Christmas on this day, and then the next day is 360, right? And you might have an idea of where I'm going with this, but the internal angles, what's going to match up with this 360 but a box? Okay, and what do we have the day after Christmas? I think Canada might do this as well, Boxing Day. Boxing Day, the box, 360 is the day after Christmas, and for some strange reason, it's a bit like the Labor Day thing. Is it a name that's given to something, and there's, deeper hidden meaning behind that name? Boxing Day, yeah, 360 degrees, and the reference there is it's the same number of degrees in a circle as well. Okay, so that's pretty mental. I don't know really what it really means. Just interesting. I wanted to explain one other thing, because if you divide the number 11 by pi, okay, that was our main difference, number 11, the one that's sort of the most popular, I guess, the one that happens the most. You end up with 3.501 something. This is, again, this 153 showing up here is pretty interesting, because I know it's the difference between the two cycles, but if we were to imagine for 1 minute that the overlap, let me get on a better color. If we were to imagine for a minute that the overlap of the Vesica Pisces was the number 11 here, okay, so this was like 11 here, so I've got this drawn in. So these would both be the same size circles, essentially. And what actually happens is, this is kind of a bit of an abstract idea, but the physical world, you can't really see the metaphysical world, right? So the moon's representing the metaphysical world, and when these two things overlap, what we see is we see the full 365 here, okay, but this dotted line of the moon here, yeah, but actually, well, I shouldn't have drawn it like that. What I should have done is done it like this. Look, we see the full 365 days here, okay, but because the sun has kind of eaten a bit of this moon, a bit like Pac-Man, what we only have for the moon is we only see this amount of the cycle, okay, and the bit that's behind the sun we don't see. So again, I just thought it was an interesting way of looking at things. I don't know if technically dividing 11 by pi is really necessarily has a reason other than it's the bit that's missing right here, okay, or actually the bit that's right here. So I don't know. That's the portion that's missing, and the portion that's missing is the bit that we've got to try and get back to. Okay, that's that part. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to round out with a couple of interesting number jumps, because we've kind of mentioned Madonna in here. I kind of talked about that 116. I kind of got pegged for Madonna. And again, you know, what's interesting about, I was just saying about flipping this to 119. Well, again, this 112, if you flip the number, I don't know if I said this already, but if you flip the 112, it just stays, that stays as a 2. So that becomes 211, the way Americans would say the 11th of February. Okay, the same way as this 11/6 actually became a, if you rotate it around, it becomes a 9/11. And it's the right way around for how America says the date, okay? Because of course this is all about America, the new child coming back into balance, basically. What else did I want to say? Yeah, CRM 114. I probably forgot to mention that, and I think I come across something the other day, but I'm pretty sure that if you gematria CRM, just those letters, it matches up with 1, you know, ONE. Okay, I'm pretty sure they match up, or they're at least three of the numbers match up pretty close. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But I just thought I was interested with the CRM and the idea of the 1 again, and this 114. And of course, I'll tell you what's interesting about this 114. Well, we'll go to it right now. Let me show you this, and then we'll do these couple of number jumps. We'll be done. Remember, I did the 814. There's basically a few weeks ago I did this number sort of number jump decode out of the chart Lorraine, and it basically ties the number 814 to Christmas of 2023. Okay, and if we do the Vesica Pisces jump, the 153 fish, okay, where we end up is we end up at 114. So this was kind of interesting, but what's more interesting is, of course, I did this number jump for Madonna, and the 153 for Madonna takes us to January the 16th, our sun diameter. So this would be a perfect day for her to croak on, because it would be like her coming back into balance with the sun, basically, referencing that 116. And again, remember the 116 on the dartboard. Actually, let's just go to it. We'll just have a quick look. Remember that 116 on the dartboard is, you know, part of the perfect cross, the 203 straight up and down, and 116. In fact, the 11th of June is the 203rd day of the year as well, as a reference there. But notice Madonna's numbers, you know, adjacent to this sort of, diagonal cross, and the numbers of pi here as well across from Madonna. So this is interesting anyway. One more number jump, just to sort of solidify what I'm saying here. Okay, let's put 9/11 in, and let's do the 153 days from 9/11, February the 11th. Okay, and what is super interesting about February the 11th this year, maybe this is the ritual, but I'm thinking it possibly could be the Hoover Dam, is what we're going to have on. We're going to have the Super Bowl, and the trophy for the Super Bowl is the Vesica Pisces with the phallic symbol heading into it. Okay, so again, it makes me think of iPet Goat with the little blue vessel with an explosion coming out of the top of it with the black Madonna. So I don't know, but maybe that's just the ritual, having that on that particular day. This celebration of the Vesica Pisces shaped ball that's got to go through the, down the, between the two legs, the two legs that lead out from, the Vesica Pisces. And that's the thing, isn't it? That's the gateway. You got to make your way down the long dark tunnel to be reborn. But the key is, can you stand at the gateway? Can you stay at the gateway without being tempted to go into the gateway? And this is where the idea of all men being sinners, and the idea of sex being a sin, is this idea of, can you resist? It's the metaphor, can you resist going into the matrix? Extremely difficult thing to do, isn't it? But standing at that gateway and being able to observe with your eyes, with the eye here, being able to observe both sides of reality, because once you can observe the correctness of the actual physical world around you, at that point, once you can observe what's going on correctly, then you can be more righteous in your decision making. And notice again that this is two Vesica Pisces in this diagram, and again the two lips when you kiss under the mistletoe. Notice the berries. When you kiss under the mistletoe with the leaves and the berries, again, actually mistletoe does remind me of the leaves and the berries that are on the dollar bill as well, those laurel leaves and the berries there, with all the encoding. So again, this is, we've got a leaf here and we've got a berry here. So the encoding's just mental, really. But these are the two lips coming together and kissing. Okay, and again, if we break down very simply, when you are on the inside of a, when you're on the inside of a circle and you're walking, you're basically walking a straight line, but you make 360-degree turn, don't you? But you're essentially on a straight line when you like, the idea is with the world being a sphere, so to speak, is you can walk off in one direction and you'll end up back at the same spot. But what I'm saying here is, what was I saying? To break this down is that this is essentially, if you were walking that line, would be a straight line. This would be a straight line. This would be a straight line. And this would be a straight line. Okay? And so it's not difficult to pull the numbers, 11, 11 out of here. I know for some people that's a stretch. But, when the Vesica Pisces, comes back to, back together and closes, that's the number there, the number 11, the two lips. Oh gosh, get off that. I just want to get rid of this nonsense here. So, what else do I want to say? think I've covered everything. This video is probably way too long. Was there anything else? I'm just trying to think. No, I'm going to leave it there. That 1111, and in fact, you know, it's not a stretch to get to the 18, the number 8 as well, is it? You know, I mean, it's just so that 1118 is 11:8 number is super important. I'm going to leave it there. I think we've pretty much done everything that I wanted to talk about in here. I've probably forgotten stuff. Like when I go back through this, I'll probably realise I've forgotten something. But by all means, go and look at there is some really interesting videos on the 153 fish. I'm not sure that everybody that is putting these videos out about the 153 fish really is covering this kind of idea. But again, when you look at this now, it makes you wonder whether we, you know, whether the idea of Jesus maybe really ought to be referencing the earth more, and maybe the Son is referencing maybe the Father. So you have the Father and the Mother, and then the Son here. Okay, and the Son is, you know, man is the physical, yeah. But rather than being the actual Son, it's really the earth, if you follow what I'm saying. The idea of the Son is it represents the physical world, and everything in the true physical world is perfect, you know, and that is all, you know, and basically this whole thing is God, yeah. I mean, realistically speaking, the whole thing is God. But if you wanted to just put a single point on what God is actually it's actually this point right here. And I'll draw a heart there. That's really what God is right there, is that central point of balance between the whole thing. You know, you can take a line, just as these three circles are, you know, basically representing a line. It's one thing, that's basically God. But in order for it to exist, there has to be a point of balance. So for anything to exist or not exist, there has to be a point at which that thing balances. And that is really, you know, what God is. Pure potential, basically. I'm going to leave it there. Done. Yeah, done. I hope I haven't forgotten anything. Alright, I hope you enjoyed that one. I know there was a lot of wiffly waffly and all over the place. Appreciate you staying tuned to the end if you did, if you made it that far. Alright. I guess, you know, I guess best wishes for the new year for everybody now. So, and I'm going to be keeping my eyes a little bit peeled on the 16th and maybe on the 14th and definitely on the 11th. So there we go. Oh, just one more thing. Notice that those two numbers do encode the 213 of the start of Lucas numbers there. Just another interesting thing. Alright, anyway. Ciao for now. Right, bye.